Boone County, Kentucky, 1976. A passerby discovers the body of a girl on a roadside.
As a police officer, there are many times where you get called to a scene where there are dead bodies. Thankfully, fewer of them involve children.
But this case involves a teenager who has been raped and murdered.
Our female victim was partially clothed with a bra and a shirt. And additionally, there was some jewelry located on her that was taken from the scene as well.
The murder leaves the victim's family struggling for answers.
Who in their right mind is with someone and decides tonight, I'm going to take this person's life? That's just beyond my comprehension.
The investigation that follows lasts over 40 years until the emergence of a revolutionary forensic technique.
This would not have been solved without that science.
It completely changed the investigation here, and I'm very excited about the possibilities that it could lead in the future.
Will this case ever be closed, even with cutting-edge science and determined investigators? I'm Nancy Grace. This is Bloodline Detectives. Boone County, Kentucky, a quiet rural community just across the state line from Cincinnati, Ohio.
We moved here in 1965. It was very, very different then than what it's like now. It's overpopulated, it's grown, there's hardly any, woodlands left, there's apartments and stores everywhere. I liked it the old way, but you have to go with what's going on.
We don't have a lot of murders here, but when we do have murders, they tend to be the scratch your head, whodunit kind of murders.
On the morning of June 5, 1976, a local driving to work makes a horrific discovery.
As he was making his way across Chambers Road, he saw what he believed to be a body laying there. And then as he got out of the vehicle and looked at it, he realized that this was a young female and was partially clothed. She obviously was deceased, and that was the phone call that he made to the Kentucky State Police Post.
The first officer on the scene, Trooper Jan Hoshner. Very soon, more police follow.
There was a young white female, appeared to be about 16, 17 years of age. She was only wearing her bra and a white blouse, and then she was unclothed the rest of her body. There was a lot of blood. You could see there had been trauma to her head.
Investigators searched the area for any tangible evidence, hoping for clues left behind by the killer.
Our female victim was partially clothed with a bra and a shirt. And that was really, at least initially, sort of the big evidence. And additionally, there was some jewelry that was located on her that was taken from the scene as well.
On those items specifically, there were also hairs that were taken as evidence. The body was removed from the scene on Chambers Road to the office in Florence, Kentucky at Stith Funeral Home.
It is so often the case that at the very early stages in a homicide, police have a body, yes. They have some evidence, yes. But what they don't have is an identity of the victim. They still don't have a name.
Detective Keith started working his case throughout the day, and as the night wore on, then Mrs. Reneker had called to report her daughter was missing, that she hadn't come home. She'd been gone all night. And Detective Jerry Keith went to the residence. He had described the necklace that he had found the 2 necklaces and the earring. And when he described that, Betty said, yes, that's Carol's. He felt sure then that, hey, this was her daughter. To make positive identification, there has to be a viewing.
They needed someone to come and identify the body. So Thomas, her older brother, who was 18, he stepped up and identified that it was Carol Sue.
An autopsy reveals how Carol Sue Klaber was murdered.
The result of it was the death was caused by blunt force trauma to the head. She was hit many, many times in the head, and that was the cause of death. But there was also attempted strangulation with the necklaces that she was wearing.
And it was assumed a tire iron that he used to bash her head, 7 injuries. And head wounds bleed. You know, you can have a small scratch and you know that it will bleed. I cannot imagine the crime scene. It had to be horrendous.
Carol's cousin hears the awful news.
I doubted myself, to be quite honest with you. It was such a shock. I looked at my mom and I said, Mom, you know, isn't Carol Sue Klaber, right? Our cousin. Yes. Oh, Mom, you know, she was murdered. So my mother, of course, became very upset. And at that time, we didn't have cell phones, and the only phone was a payphone at the dock. So she took off out of the cabin and went to the dock and called home, and I'm certain she called my great-grandmother her grandmother.
A beautiful teen girl brutally raped and murdered. Only a few clues left behind in a quiet, neighborly community that's in shock. Will the killer of teen girl Carol Klaber ever be found? Next on Bloodline Detectives. Walton, Kentucky, June 1976. The body of a beautiful teen girl, Carol Klaber, found dumped by the roadside. Carol had been raped and then struck repeatedly with blunt force. Investigators have very little to go on as they piece together clues found there in this remote location.
We have had several bodies over the years that are dumped immediately close to Interstate 75. However, where her body was found, it would have taken quite a while for the person to drive to that location and to dump her body. So the actual location she was in, it was really unusual.
For local investigators, everything so far seems very unusual about the case. Adding to that, the brutality of what happened to Carol is frightening an entire community.
It takes what is otherwise a very safe community and it makes them afraid, especially for it to happen at a place like Devou Park, a place you feel safe, that families go to routinely, that people can walk.
There was fear. There was a lot of fear in a lot of the girls at school.
Myself and our friends, we made a basic constant social rule. If we arrive together and we go somewhere together, we all leave together. It just made you more aware of what could happen, that loss of innocence, so to speak.
When investigators chase down possible clues from the crime scene, they also focus on another angle. Who is Carol Klaber? Is it possible she knew her killer?
Carol was a 16-year-old young high school girl. She went to Dixie High School in Kentucky. Her family was well-to-do. Her father was an engineer in the oil industry, and he brought up a daughter that he was going to cherish his whole life. She played the piano, she played lawn darts, and she would play croquet.
She was vivacious but not gregarious, fun, intelligent, very smart, very athletic, very comfortable to be around. more taking almost a leadership role in social situations. Dependable. You know, you knew she was a friend. She was that type of person. You just knew she was the personality that would be a friend.
Carol was a Girl Scout and she was a Brownie. Now, in Kentucky, this was middle America where there were values about growing up and being a part of the community. And that was Carol because her father felt that. Her father died in 1970. It was a terrible impact upon her. And she wanted to fulfill what her dad wanted, and that was to be someone who cared, because when you are part of the Girl Scouts of America, you have a value of caring for people, and in return, those people care about you.
Easy to make friends with, real easy to talk to, but she also was kind of quiet, and it kind of took her a while to, you know, to get to know people. But once she got to know you, she was like, and if she was a friend to you, that's what she was.
She was a success story in the works. Her talent, her intelligence, her willingness to reach out to other people was very rare. She was a gift. She was a beautiful person.
Details begin to emerge about the teen girl's movements the day of her murder.
At that time, some details were shared with my mother that she had been riding her bike and came home and said that she was going out to dinner with a man.
They placed her bicycle in the trunk of the car. She got into the car with him and drove back to her house, which is a very strong indication that that was someone that she knew. When they got back to the house, she took the bike out of the car, put it in the garage, went upstairs. Her mom heard her. She said she was headed out to go to Zeno's, which was a restaurant, with some friends. And so as she goes out the door, Mom didn't actually see her eye to eye, and she looks out the window, and she had changed her purple blouse to a white blouse and got into the vehicle with a gentleman. The vehicle was described by a lady across the street as being a newer model Pontiac Grand Prix or Chevy Monte Carlo. And she gave a description, an amazing description of the individual as being 5'10", slender build, approximately 150 pounds, real light blonde hair. Detective Keith had looked at some other cases in the area that were unsolved, and there was a sketch in one of those cases he would have considered at that time a companion case that he thought was related to this one. So there was a sketch that eventually in the Klaber case was kind of put out, if anyone recognizes this, because he believed at the time that the same person who did a rape case in Park Hills, Kentucky, was the same person who would have done Carol Klaber's rape and murder.
Investigators in 1976 feel they're beginning to make progress. They've got a decent description of the suspect and a possible link to another rape case.
There were several girls that had been raped and murdered in the greater Cincinnati area during that time period. So much so that Detective Keith met with other police agencies to, kind of have a little think tank and see the commonality and all of those kinds of things. And out of those type of meetings was where he decided that the Park Hills case was really close. There were a lot of similarities in the two cases, cigarette burns on the body, attempted strangulation. And honestly, when we went back and reviewed the case, we really saw his point. So much so that we ended up going all the way down that road to vet the suspect that he had originally identified in that case.
Investigators in Boone County, Kentucky have come so close to finding the vicious rapist and killer that preyed on a young teen girl. But close is not good enough. As we see next on Bloodline Detectives, it may take 40 years and groundbreaking science for Bloodline Detectives to try their best to close this case. It's been 40 long years since the brutal rape and murder of teen girl Carol Klaber in Boone County, Kentucky. Now, 2017, there's a new generation of detectives who reopen the investigation.
Over the years, we always thought about her. Myself, and I know some of her friends, she'd be on people's minds. I would drive past the sheriff's office and think about her every time. Did they ever solve that? Why did we never hear anything more about that? Who was that person that took her life? So she never leaves your mind.
The new cold case investigators pore over case files from Carol Klaber's murder. Their hope? That advances in forensic DNA technology will lead them to the man who so cruelly took this teen girl's life back in 1976.
We went to Park Hills Police Department. There were no police officers still at Park Hills PD from 1976. So everyone there was a different group from chief on down. It's a smaller department. They had nothing to do with the original investigation. So when we went there, we asked if we could look at the case and make a copy of it. And the chief, who I admire him for this, he said, "Hey, we will sign the case over to you if you want, because it is simply sitting there because we have to keep it, and no one will ever look at it again."
There were two very strong suspects in this case. One of which was somebody who was incarcerated and is presently incarcerated on charges unrelated to this murder. And then there was another suspect that was just outright exonerated through evidence related to this case through a DNA analysis. So we had two strong suspects. And in any case, to have a suspect, let alone the possibility of two, and when those two don't pan out, that can be deflating. And you really have to start back at square one. As an agency, as a group of investigators, we have to then refocus on, okay, what do we have left?
We work pretty closely with our cold case unit. Whenever they have something come up, they usually bring it to us and ask us kind of what the potential is and what's the best way to go about testing. So in this particular circumstance, the cold case unit had come across a hair that they thought could be of potential value that was never fully exploited with modern technology. So they brought that to the criminal forensic unit, and we took a look at it and proposed a plan for going forward with the testing. Initially, we gave it to the Kentucky State Police. The Kentucky State Police, for us, is the laboratory that handles all of our DNA testing, at least for the first round. They had inconclusive results.
The failure to extract a DNA profile is a huge disappointment to investigators, but they don't give up.
Whenever we have something, and particularly in a cold case, where we have an item of evidence that was brought to light by really good cold case investigators, we really have high hopes when we see things like that this could be the key, this could be the thing. And initial reports from the state police were like, hey, I think we can maybe get something out of this. So it was positive in the beginning. So when we got the inconclusive results, it was a setback.
So often there is a familiar pattern in cases like this. First, a breakthrough, then a dead end, then another breakthrough. And that is exactly what happens in Carol Klaber's case when Othram Laboratories out of Texas, the world's leaders in forensic genetic genealogy, reach out to Boone County investigators.
I started getting a lot of phone calls from a representative from Othram, and most of that went along the lines of, hey, we are a lab, we do genealogy, we want to help solve crimes. If you have cases with unknown DNA profiles in the National CODIS database, then we want to help you.
Othram's work is expensive, so Boone County detectives first need to find funding.
They had shared with us the information about Season of Justice. The way they explained it was, look, if you talk to them and apply for a grant and your case meets this criteria, there's a really good chance they're going to provide the funding for you. And again, it's like, yeah, this is too good to be true, but okay, let's do it.
We received from the agency evidence of the assault. From that evidence, the agency had identified an unknown male contributor. So there was male DNA that was found, and they thought that this male DNA came from the person that had essentially assaulted and murdered her.
The state lab created the DNA profile for STR testing first, and then that DNA was sent to us in a tube.
Short tandem repeat. STR analysis for short is a method that creates a person's DNA profile by counting the number of times a small DNA sequence is repeated at a specific chromosomal location.
Hair has very different DNA parameters than other types of inputs, for sure, and would be something that would be difficult to run through a standard medical test or consumer test assay. And I think that's why this case had failed previously in other laboratories. We were able to assess the characteristics of that DNA extract and figure out what the best way to go about creating the best and most robust DNA profile would be that we could use to identify who that perpetrator was.
Forensic genetic genealogy kind of has, in my mind, two prongs. There is one prong that is scientific, where we look at DNA and genetics and relations between people over time, and we use that angle. Also included in that would be Y chromosomal testing, where we just look at the male side of the family. And then there's a whole nother prong that goes through very traditional genealogy research, like family tree sort of stuff that most folks are familiar with, that you couple with that scientific information in this day and age, and hopefully it gets us to an investigative lead.
That DNA is uploaded to genealogical databases consented for law enforcement use, and when they're uploaded, you end up getting really, really distant matches. So instead of just being able to confirm someone's identity, you can now figure out that someone is related to this person as a sixth cousin match, and this person is a fifth cousin match, and this person is a third cousin match. And you can figure out how far away each match is from the person that left the DNA at the crime scene. And then you can infer where the person that left the DNA at the crime scene belongs on a family tree.
And in doing that, we were then able to derive enough matches, enough people that shared at least some similarity in the markers, to which we could then piece together a family tree. And in building that family tree, we were able to hone in on leads that directed law enforcement to where we thought the person might sit on that tree.
I was a little skeptical. However, when Othram said that they had a good profile and they thought that it was something that they could do something with early on, then I was extremely hopeful.
It's been 46 years since teen girl Carol Klaber's horrific sex attack and murder. And now, investigators finally have a powerful scientific weapon that may identify her killer. That's next on Bloodline Detectives. Boone County, Kentucky, 2022. Detectives on the cusp of discovering who killed teen girl Carol Klaber all the way back in 1976. Investigators have provided Othram Labs with a hair sample that was found at the crime scene 46 years ago. That hair sample hits a home run. It rules out the existing persons of interest, but crucially, it points to a new name and a new prime suspect.
Because they had an STR profile, they were able to do one-to-one comparisons to exclude suspects. And I think there was 2 people early on that were identified and ruled out because their STR profiles did not match at all the STR profile at the crime scene. And so, even though there was an early hope for success when they had identified these suspects, both were excluded. And so after the process we went through at Othram to build up the big profile and develop the leads, when we came across, eventually the person that they honed in on, his name was Thomas Dunaway. It was very exciting to be able to share that with them because they had a new suspect in the case.
40 years after the brutal sex assault and murder of Carol Klaber, a prime suspect is revealed thanks to investigative genetic genealogy. The perp's name, Thomas Dunaway, last known to be a resident of Park Hills, Kentucky. And like the murder victim, Carol Klaber, Dunaway is a teen at the time of the murder. When detectives zero in on Dunaway, they discover he's got an extensive and violent criminal history, including arson and possession of an illegal firearm. When they dig deeper, investigators find out Thomas Dunaway is dead. He died from a heart attack in 1990. Detectives are denied the chance to ever question him, but news from Othram Labs confirms he's guilty.
The news that we got back was,
this is a 100% match. Thomas Dunaway is your guy that committed the crime.
Thomas Dunaway is who we, through the DNA profile, identified as Carol Klaber's murderer.
after 47 years, finally tracking down the killer, finally identifying Mr. Dunaway as the killer was an extremely, extremely gratifying experience.
We wanted to have something in writing formally, both for the family and for the community, to say that Detectives Cox and Adams had found and identified the killer. And so we sent them a letter basically stating that while we could not do a posthumous indictment, it was my opinion that they had identified the killer, that there was proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Thomas Dunaway had murdered Carol Sue Klaber, and that had he been alive, we would seek an indictment and would seek to prosecute him for murder.
Cold case detectives discover that 9 days after Klaber's body is found, Thomas Dunaway enlists in the U.S. Army. He goes AWOL. Then he murders 19-year-old Ronald Townsend in Boone County just 6 months after the death of Carol Klaber.
We believe that there's a really good chance that Dunaway knew Carol Klaber from the time they were much younger.
Northern Kentucky right now, it's a small community in the sense that it's not hard to know everyone here, but it was a much smaller community in 1976. So I think it is certainly plausible and if not likely that he knew her and sought her out. In fact, I think it would be unlikely to say that he didn't.
Knowing how generous she was and how friendly she was, I imagine that she invited him to go to dinner with everybody. Her friends were all going to Zeno's. And I imagine she said, come on, let's go. You can go with me. And probably said, well, hey, I'll drive. Because when you met somebody and you were friends, you always invited them, come on, let's go as a group, let's go. I think that's what happened.
Social scientists tell us that crimes of violence and sex crimes are not about sex. It's hard to understand that. We think that this is a sexual predator who wants to have a sexual thrill. The social scientists tell us, no, that's not what it is. The crime of violence is an issue of dominance, the issue of taking this predator's personality and imposing it on someone who is weaker and unable to defend themselves. That is usually the motive, not some sexual thrill. Well, we don't know. We weren't there for Carol's murder. We can't say for certain, but what we can say is, generally speaking, these sexual crimes are crimes to dominate and to humiliate a woman. And where that comes from, only the good Lord seems to know.
Boone County law enforcement goes public with the news, in part to tell the community this case is finally solved. but they're also looking for any help in linking Dunaway to other crimes in Kentucky and beyond.
In this case, we did a press conference because of the nature of us solving a cold case that was nearly 50 years old, but also given the implications with this case and the strong belief that he may be responsible for other crimes, possibly outside of the state of Kentucky, is also one of the central focuses of what I had to do in relaying a message to the public that was understandable and that people could then take and absorb so that it may benefit our case as a whole.
The initial cause of death was blunt force trauma, with also evidence of sexual assault and strangulation.
It was a bit shocking, actually. I was working from home and I have multiple computers, and it came into my newsfeed. And of course, name. I'm sitting at home by myself and I just, oh my gosh, they found him. And I saw the picture. That's the picture that they used in the news of her. You know, so I knew there was no mistake. This was not a spam, a made up thing. I immediately picked up the phone and called the sheriff's department and thanked them. I'm very grateful that they followed up and they solved the crime.
Thomas Dunaway was definitely in Boone County around that period of time because he was arrested for murder in December of 1976. So Carol went missing and was found raped and murdered on June 5th, 1976. And 6 months later, now this person that has been identified that, hey, this is someone you definitely should look at, committed a murder in Boone County 6 months later.
I was literally floored because he had murdered someone else, dumped them in near about the same place, and received a life sentence in prison, I believe, and he only served 7.5 years of his prison sentence. And it's like, once a liar, always a liar. Once a thief, always a thief. Once a killer, always a killer. You know, it's not going to stop.
If this were in Kentucky, in my circuit right now, I have a hard time believing someone who committed an intentional murder would be out after 7 years.
There's no way in the world you can make any sense of it. When I read the report from the parole officer, so he got out on good behavior at 7.5 years on a life sentence. But what was documented in the report was enough to, even if they needed more than the fact that he had killed someone, they articulated all kinds of infractions while he was in there, which you would think like, you're not getting out. I have no explanation. It's in my opinion, a complete failure on the justice system. He should have not been out.
How do you tell? How do you tell that that person has the capacity to do this when you meet someone? That was the first thing that came to mind. Were there clues of his personality?
He was where he should have been, especially now that we know that he not only did one murder, but he did 2 murders and a rape, and what we believe to be more across the southern United States, because 3 would make him a serial killer. I just wish justice had sent him there, but that's not mine to judge. I'm not a judge and I'm not God.
Bloodline detectives nail the identity of teen girl Carol Klaber's killer. It's Thomas Dunaway. But investigators now believe Dunaway is responsible for even more murders. Next on Bloodline Detectives. Boone County, Kentucky, 2022. Amazing forensic work by Bloodline Detectives solves the 46-year-old sex assault and murder of a beautiful young girl, Carol Klaber. Her killer, Thomas Dunaway, also convicted of another murder before he himself dies in 1990. Since there was a 7-year period between his release from jail From the murder of the second victim and Dunaway's own death, investigators believe he very well may have committed even more murders.
Due to some information developed by our cold case detectives, there was the potential that he could have been involved in others. And the best way to help the other agencies that may have had him as a suspect is to acquire a solid DNA sample from Mr. Dunaway himself. Since Mr. Dunaway had been dead for 33 years, that meant that we had to exhume the body. And the bone that was requested in this case was ribs and molars. Those held the best potential for the DNA evidence. So myself and Detective Goodman suited up full Tyvek and anticipated getting into the grave, recovering that bone, and being done. That is unfortunately not what happened at all. In this particular circumstance, after 33 years, Mr. Dunaway looked like he had been put in the ground yesterday. So what that meant was that with a fully preserved body, we had to climb into the grave, remove the teeth and rib bones. We have solved our crime, but the exhumation and everything else was for the sole function of seeing if we could solve somebody else's.
Kentucky State Police currently working on samples in the hopes of linking Thomas Dunaway to even more unsolved murders. While his untimely death means he cheated justice, credit still goes to Boone County sheriffs who persisted for 4 decades in this investigation.
I'm very thankful to the Boone County Sheriff's Department for not letting this go. It would have been easy just to say that's a cold case and we have other things that are more pressing, which you will hear that in the judicial system. We have other cases that are bigger, we have things that are larger, we have things that affect now, and that they didn't walk away from her. I'm very impressed and very grateful.
One of the reasons that we do this job is to speak for victims. That's why we do this, is to do the right thing. And in this particular circumstance, we got to do that. And Ms. Klaber still had family that was very, very much interested in what had happened to her. And we were able to give them that little peace of mind.
Carol Klaber's killer is identified thanks to investigative genetic genealogy, a powerful new investigative tool Othram Labs is using to solve cold cases all across our country.
Even if Season of Justice had said, you know what, for whatever reason, we're not going to fund it, they would have found a way. Othram was committed, and I've learned that from dealing with them over this period of time. They would have found a way to make sure that it got funded. We wouldn't be sitting here today talking about solving Carol Klaber's case if it wasn't for Othram and Season of Justice.
I think if they realized that they were going to get caught and that it's a matter of time, that less crime would be committed in the future. But I also believe that maybe more people will start coming forward and confessing.
The times, they are a-changing. And as a result of that, there's new techniques. Therefore, you are duty-bound as law enforcement, as Boone County law enforcement recognized, and I give them high marks for doing that.
It completely changed the investigation here, and I'm very excited about the possibilities that it could lead in the future for future investigations and potentially resolving other cold cases we have in this community.
When you have breakthroughs in science, and then that science is used for the greater good in any case, whether it's a cold case or a more active ongoing murder investigation, sexual assault, whatever it may be, that's really a game changer and something that the community should really embrace.
After more than 40 years, the murder of 16-year-old Carol Klaber finally solved, thanks to law enforcement who never gave up and to the power of forensic science.
After all this time, somebody valued her as a person enough to put their energy into this on her behalf. she's not here. She can't hold them accountable. She can't hold the Boone County or the Kentucky State Police accountable for what happens in solving the murder. They did this on their own. And that's an honor to her, in my opinion.
I don't think you ever can get back your loved one, or justice can take back what happened to you or to someone you cared about. But I think that the truth can allow you to move forward.
Groundbreaking science and great police work, each one amazing in their own right. But when they are combined, even 46-year-old cases like Carol Klaber's murder can be solved. I'm Nancy Grace. Thanks for joining us here on Bloodline Detectives.